In Queens, New York, behind rows of weathered stone, lie men who once lived by a different code. A code of silence, power, and violence. Tonight, we're standing over 3 graves. One man who ruled with fear, and one who operated in silence, and one whose story may never fully be known, and one more, whose power was so carefully hidden, he was never meant to be found at all.
I won't run from the storm. I arrive after it.
Carmine Galante didn't wait for power. He took it. Born in East Harlem in 1910, Galante came up in a world where survival meant dominance. By the time he reached adulthood, he wasn't just part of organized crime. He was shaping it. Under Joseph Bonanno, Galante proved himself as an enforcer, but he quickly evolved into something more dangerous. A man who didn't believe in waiting his turn. Most mobsters respected structure. Galante challenged it. He recognized early that narcotics was the future, and by the 1960s and 70s, he was deeply involved in international heroin trafficking tied to what authorities would later call the Pizza Connection. This wasn't just business. This was control over a new criminal economy. Galante didn't just create fear. He created isolation. His violence made people obey him, but it didn't make them loyal. And in the Mafia, that's a dangerous difference. July 12th, 1979, Joe and Mary's restaurant, Brooklyn. Galante sits outside, cigar in his mouth, relaxed. Then gunmen enter. No hesitation, no warning, just gunfire. When it's over, Galante is dead, and the cigar still in his mouth and lighter in hand. Galante didn't fall because he was weak. He fell because he stood alone.
Mob boss Carmine Galante was gunned down back in 1979. Since then, the men who ordered his gangland execution have gone unnamed. Tonight, for the first time, there's been a major breakthrough in that case, one that could blow the lid off one of the underworld's best-kept secrets. Steve Powers reports.
It was expected that the assassination of Carmine Galante would be the same as those of Albert Anastasia and Joey Gallo, that the code of omerta, silence, would descend like a curtain on the murders. There was Carmine Galante, known as the Cigar, laying sprawled in the backyard of Joe and Mary's restaurant in the Bushwick section of Brooklyn. The cigar clenched in his teeth, an eye shot out, a grotesque idol to those who worship the violence, power, and corruption of organized crime. Galante was 69 years old, the Don of the Bonanno family, who said he was going to step down from power, when 3 assassins, using machine guns and a .45, killed him and 2 other people as they lunched on salad, fruit, bread, and a jug of wine. Mysteriously, 2 of Galante's bodyguards, Baldassare Amato and Cesar Bonaventre, were uninjured and walked away unscratched. Now, that was on July 12th, 1979, and since then, the name of the plotters of the murder has been unspoken in public. But now, as an apparent result of the so-called Pizza Connection case and the testimony of Sicilian mob chieftain Tommaso Buscetta, the U.S. Attorney is naming names.
3 individuals named in the indictment were directly involved and participated in both the planning for the murder, and the cover-up of it. And that would be Salvatore Catalano, Giuseppe Ganci, and Baldassare Amato.
Amato was one of the bodyguards.
That's right. Amato was one of the bodyguards, and Bonaventre was originally charged in this indictment, but in the interim, he's been murdered.
Bonaventre found chopped up in New Jersey. So why was Galante hit? Well, new charges also claim that Salvatore Catalano, one of the plotters, was promoted to street boss for the Bonanno family right after the assassination.
Catalano took over the area of the Bonanno family's business that had always been Galante's preserve, and that is the drug business. He moved up and took over the role of being in charge of or boss of the Sicilian faction within the family, which was the faction that was bringing huge amounts of heroin into the United States.
You don't know who actually hit him, though, the actual hitman.
Well, I can't comment on that because it's not in the indictment.
But do you actually know?
I, at this point, have no comment on that.
So are these cases devastating to the Mafia? Well, Giuliani admits they are not, but he says the word is getting out on the street that the Mafia is no longer untouchable, citing 6 cases, 117 indictments in the past year. Steve Powers, Channel 5 News.
Our next gentleman we go visit is Carmine Fatico. And Carmine Fatico is not a name that dominates Mafia history. There were no major headlines, no widely known trials, no dramatic shootouts tied to his legacy. And yet, that absence is exactly what made him important. And to understand a man like Fatico, you have to understand how organized crime actually functioned beneath the surface. Because the Mafia wasn't built on moments of violence, it was built on systems that worked every single day. A crew like Fatico's would have operated as part of a larger family structure, most likely tied into the Queens Brooklyn network of street-level rackets. And their job wasn't to attract attention. Their job was to produce income consistently. And that meant running illegal gambling operations that generated steady weekly cash, managing sports betting and number of games across neighborhoods, overseeing loan sharking where debts were controlled and extended, and maintaining influence over local businesses and labor connections. Every operation fed into the same system. Money moved upward, respect flowed downward. But violence existed, right? But it wasn't the focus. The most valuable men weren't the loudest or the most feared. They were the most reliable. The ones who collected money without problems, kept disputes quiet, avoided police attention, and most importantly, didn't disrupt the flow, because disruption was bad for business. And men like Fatico lived in a strange balance, right? They were known within their world, trusted by their crew, connected to power, but completely invisible to the outside. They didn't need recognition because recognition brought risk. And the pressure just didn't come from law enforcement. It came from inside. Because if money stopped flowing, if attention was drawn, or if something went wrong, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a problem that had to be fixed quickly. So, in that world, you didn't rise by being noticed. You survived by being consistent. So, unlike many mob figures who died violently, Carmine Fatico's life appears to have ended in a much quieter way. No public execution, no high-profile assassination. He lived long enough to eventually be laid to rest here in St. John's Cemetery. And that in itself should tell you something, because in organized crime, a quiet ending often means one thing. He understood the rules. He stayed within the structure. He didn't overreach. And he didn't attract the kind of attention that leads to violent consequences. Not every member of the mob dies in a hail of bullets. Some of them walk away from life quietly. And when they're gone, the only trace they leave behind is a name carved into stones. Carmine Fatico may not be remembered as a boss or a headline figure, but men like him were the foundation, the ones who kept the system running, the ones who made sure everything worked, and the ones who understood that the greatest power in that world was staying just out of sight. And this is the last gentleman we're going to visit on this episode that's actually buried here. This is Frank Tieri. Frank Tieri stands at a turning point in Mafia history, the moment survival became more important than dominance. By the late 1970s, law enforcement had changed the game. The government stopped chasing individual crimes and started targeting entire organizations. The goal wasn't arrest anymore. It was dismantling the system. The Genovese family responded differently than others. They slowed down. They reduced exposure. They built layers. So if Tieri was a front boss, his role wasn't fake. It was strategic. He was visible enough to absorb attention, legitimate enough to maintain structure, and replaceable enough to protect others. That's a dangerous position because it means you're important, but not essential. And orders didn't come directly. They moved through intermediaries. Each layer only knew what it needed to know. That way, no one person had the full picture, and no one arrest could collapse the system. So this wasn't just crime anymore. It was organizational design. Once the government made this RICO statute, I think that was the catalyst for the downfall of the mob that people saw on the outside. So Tieri's conviction wasn't just about him. It was proof that even the most careful systems could still be penetrated. So Tieri didn't represent power. He represented adaptation. And adaptation is what kept the Mafia alive.
Here in New York, another story of alleged fakery, this one involving the man federal agents say is the most powerful Mafia godfather in the land. They say he's been faking mental illness for years to escape the law. But today, federal agents could declare the show is over. Anthony Mason reports.
It took 6 years finally to bring him to court, the frail, trembling man who federal agents say is the boss of the wealthiest, most powerful crime family in the country. Vincent the Chin Gigante pleaded not guilty today to a battery of charges.
You've got 6 murders, 3 conspiracies to commit murder, labor payoffs, extortion.
But how could this man be a mob boss? For decades, Gigante's routinely been seen wandering his Greenwich Village neighborhood in his pajamas and bathrobe, mumbling incoherently.
He makes a good case that he's crazy, but as has been said many times in the past, he's crazy like a fox.
Jules Bonavolante led the FBI squad that first arrested Gigante in 1990. In court, his attorneys said he was too sick to stand trial. For 6 years, they argued over Gigante's mental condition. The judge finally ordered in a team of psychiatrists to check out the Chin.
He acted continuously as though he was some kind of a zombie.
Dr. Daniel Schwartz at first declared Gigante unfit, but then John Gotti's chief lieutenant, Sammy the Bull Gravano, turned informant and fingered the Chin as a Mafia don. Dr. Schwartz reevaluated his patient.
There were conversations that he had with people that indicated that he was, in his particular field, let's say, a good businessman.
Last month, Judge Eugene Nickerson, calling Gigante's behavior an elaborate deception, ordered him to stand trial. At his arraignment today, Gigante wore a T-shirt, a windbreaker, and said nothing.
Obviously, it was a difficult day for Vincent Gigante today. You observed him, I'm sure, and you saw what he looked like.
Federal agents call him the last of the old Mafia bosses. And now that Gigante's on trial, they believe they may finally beat the Chin at his own pajama game. Anthony Mason, CBS News, Brooklyn, New York.
This is the last guy that we're going to talk about today. And I think he was one of the most important guys in Mafia history and one of the most powerful bosses, if not the most powerful boss, you know, like next to Lucky and, you know, a couple other guys. But this is the story about Vincent the Chin Gigante. And he didn't just survive the Mafia. He redefined how it operated. Before he became boss, Gigante was already a dangerous man. He started as a boxer, disciplined, controlled, used to pressure, then moved into organized crime, where those same traits translated perfectly. He wasn't impulsive, he wasn't deliberate, and that difference mattered. In 1957, Gigante was involved in the attempted assassination of Frank Costello. Costello survived, but stepped down. That moment showed two things. Number one, Gigante was trusted enough to carry out major orders. And two, he understood how power transitions actually worked. He wasn't just muscle, he was learning the structure. Now, while other mobsters chased visibility, Gigante studied survival. He watched what happened to the high-profile bosses, those flashy leaders, and men who drew attention. They all ended the same way: arrested or killed. So he chose a different path. Now, Gigante tried to fool, or did fool, a lot of people into believing he was crazy. He would just mumble all the time, walk around in his robe. The Crazy Act wasn't just about avoiding prison. It was about controlling perception at every level. To the public, he looked harmless. To law enforcement, he looked unreliable. And to outsiders, he looked irrelevant. But to his inner circle, he was still the boss. And I think Gigante created confusion on purpose, because confusion slows investigations. If agents can't determine whether someone is mentally competent, cases stall, decisions delay, momentum disappears. He didn't fight the system directly, but he made the system hesitate. One of Gigante's most effective strategies was distance. He limited direct communication. Orders passed through multiple people. Conversations were indirect. Meetings were controlled and rare. This meant even if somebody was arrested, they couldn't fully expose the system. And I think here's the part that most people miss. Gigante didn't just hide from law enforcement. He controlled his own organization the same way. Very few people had direct access to him. That created loyalty through exclusivity, power through mystery, and control through uncertainty. Because if nobody fully understood your reach, they can't challenge it. So, Gigante didn't project power, he withheld it. And that made it stronger. So, what was the result? While other mafia leaders were arrested under RICO, exposed in courts, or taken down publicly, Gigante remained in control for decades. Not because he was untouchable, but because he was unreadable. So, eventually, the act began to crack, and after years of investigation, prosecutors were able to prove that Gigante was faking mental illness. He was convicted, and like many before him, he ended up in prison. But even in that, he lasted longer than most. He adapted longer than most, and he stayed in control longer than most. So, I guess unlike many of the mobsters that are buried here at St. John's, Gigante is not buried here. After his death in 2005, he was cremated, and his remains were returned to his family. I just wanted to add him in here because nobody in their right mind can do any type of mafia boss video without having the chin at least number 1 or number 2. Vincent Gigante didn't just hide from the world. He made the world see exactly what he wanted it to see. And by the time the truth caught up, he had already rewritten the rules of power. So, like I said, there's no grave here at St. John to stand over. No markers to point to. because the most powerful man in this story made sure he would never fully be found. Thanks again, guys, for watching another video here from Tales from the Tombs NJ. I truly appreciate it. If you guys please subscribe, click the button for updates, and show me a like, or tell me who you want to talk about, and I'll try to get into it.